At the start of the 20th century, New York didn't rise only on steel and concrete. It was also built on the power of a cooking pot. Jews who crossed the Atlantic left behind pogroms, hostile laws, and a futureless life in Russia, Poland, and Ukraine, looking for a place where they could breathe and start over. On the Lower East Side, the tight sidewalks told that arrival through smell: onions in chicken fat, bagels spinning in boiling water, pickles resting in brine in barrels. When English wouldn't come out right, food spoke for them. It calmed, brought people together, reminded them of home, and helped them survive. And what was born from scarcity ended up becoming part of the city's signature. In every line there was an accent, and at every counter a plan. Behind pastrami on rye and still warm challah, there's a quiet promise. And it was about to spill out into the streets. Bagels with lox and cream cheese. Before skyscrapers took over the skyline, New York already recognized itself in something simpler: the bagel. Round and sturdy, shaped by hand by Jewish bakers who started the day in the dark. The dough went through boiling water, then into coal-fired ovens, and then out to the street in carts, down corners like Hester and Rivington. For someone who had just arrived, it wasn't just breakfast, it was a place in the city. Over time, an unlikely partner showed up. Lox, smoked salmon, expensive and rare, sliced paper-thin, lay down over cream cheese. It was salt brought from the old world, meeting the abundance of the new. In the 1920s, that combo turned into a weekend ritual, and what had been survival started to feel like a win. You could leave the shtetl behind, but one bite brought back river smoke, Shabbat mornings, and a crowded table. Bialy. If the bagel became a symbol of moving up, the bialy was always the quiet cousin. Low, soft, with a dip in the center, it trades shine for onions. The name comes from Białystok, Poland, and it gives away the logic of scarcity. No eggs and no pricey topping, so bakers put the flavor in the dough itself, with caramelized onions, poppy seeds, and salt. On the Lower East Side, it came out of cramped ovens and into the hands of people rushing to the garment shops. It was eaten on the move, sometimes with just a smear of butter, before a 12-hour shift. Unlike the bagel, it doesn't go through water. It goes straight into the oven, browns, and disappears before the pan even cools. And behind that bread, the city held on to memories of faraway ovens and families scattered out, ready to show up again in the next bite. In the smell of onions, there was a low-key message, no speech needed. We're still here, and tomorrow there's more. Kasha and kugel. Before pasta or rice became everyday staples on American plates, a lot of Jewish immigrants kept the house going with kasha. Buckwheat toasted until it browned, mixed with onions, egg, and schmaltz. It was food made from limited means and deep memory, carrying the taste of the shtetl into the heart of New York. In tight weeks, it made money stretch in a way meat never could. And when there were leftovers, kugel showed up, a baked pudding of noodles or potatoes, sweet or savory, a sure thing on Shabbat. Some people went with cottage cheese and raisins, others preferred onions and black pepper. Between one version and the next, the dish carried Eastern Europe and reminded everyone that tradition gets cooked. In the tenements, baking pans rotated through communal ovens, and women traded recipes and news while the smell climbed the stairs. Even today, one forkful lights up that past and makes room for the next story. The knish. Walk down Hester Street in 1910 and the sound comes before the steam. The vendor pushes the cart, calls out the price of a knish, and the vapor mixes with the rush of the sidewalk. That hand-sized pastry wasn't just a snack. It was food you could afford and that could get you through an entire shift. Inside, potato, onion, or kasha. Outside, a thin dough that went into the oven or the fryer until it set. In the old world, it showed up at celebrations. In New York, it became a survival tool. Immigrant women shaped them one by one and baked them in coal ovens, perfuming the street. Some had cabbage, others used up bits of meat, and some had a mash so smooth it almost seemed to vanish. When the stands spread to Coney Island and the Bronx, it was clear that bite carried more than just something to eat. And with every cart that stopped, the promise kept moving forward, not knowing where it would end up. Kosher dill pickles. Picture walking down Orchard Street in the summer of 1912. Before you even saw the shop windows, you'd catch the sharp, sour smell rising from barrels on the sidewalk, and it would make your mouth water. These weren't regular pickles. They were kosher dills, cured with garlic, salt, and cold brine, never vinegar, made by Jewish pickle makers who started at dawn and didn't stop until the street went dark. With no refrigerator and money tight, preserving was how you made it through the winter. Every barrel worked like a little lab, proportions, quiet, and time until the brine did its job. Kids bought pickles for a few cents, neighbors argued about which barrel had the perfect snap, and that side dish became identity. Sour turned into strength, right next to pastrami and corned beef. And with every new bite, the street promised another story. Gefilte fish. Few dishes left Americans so puzzled, and so many Jewish families so tied to their own history, as gefilte fish. In the shtetls of Eastern Europe, fish was expensive. To feed everyone, people ground pike, carp, or whitefish with onions, egg, and matzo meal, and the mix became dumplings poached in broth. When the recipe landed in New York with immigrants, it became a Shabbat regular. At the markets, mothers bargained for heads and bones, turning scraps into tradition. The smell filled tenements on Friday afternoons, and to passers-by, it seemed strange. But to those who knew it, it was identity. Served cold with horseradish, it brought back rivers left behind and grandparents who wouldn't return. It was proof you could lose almost everything and still keep, in one dish, flavor and faith. And every time it hits the table, another story begins. Matzo ball soup. In a tenement kitchen in New York, a pot on low heat was a message. Someone stopped to take care of you. After long days, immigrant mothers gathered whatever was in the pantry and, from leftover matzo from Passover, broken up and mixed with eggs and a little schmaltz. They made dumplings shaped with no waste. Once they dropped into the broth, they swelled and turned soft, like dry bread getting a second chance. Since chicken was a luxury, bones, skin, and necks simmered for hours to squeeze out flavor and strength. The steam spread garlic, dill, and memories, and the kitchen became an address for hope. All it took was a spoon tapping the pot for the kids to appear, pulled in by a smell that felt like home. Served on Shabbat or on sick days, the soup reminded everyone that patience and ingenuity can turn leftovers into comfort. And there's a detail in this tradition that most people don't notice. Pastrami on rye. If you could taste New York, it would taste like pastrami on rye. The recipe was born in the Jewish delis of the early century, run by Romanian immigrants who brought an old method, Cure meat in brine, season it, smoke it, and wait. In the kitchen, necessity turned into technique. Cheap cuts of brisket were rubbed with garlic, coriander, and pepper, then went into slow wood smoke until they softened. When it was time to serve, rye bread got mustard and a tower of warm slices. On the Lower East Side, delis became a meeting point. People from factories and the streets packed in at the counter, shoulder to shoulder, while the blade shaved the meat into thin strips. By the 1920s, that sandwich wasn't just one neighborhood's tradition, it was the whole city in your hand. Every bite said, without making a speech, that you could turn hard times into flavor, and that conversation is still going. Corned beef. Before it became a deli staple, corned beef was a survival trick for people starting from zero. In early 1900s New York, Jewish butchers looked at brisket, a tough and cheap cut, and decided it could go further. The meat spent days in brine, taking on salt and cure, then went into a pot with water, onions, garlic, and peppercorns. The secret was time, low heat, patience, sliced thin. On the plate it came without attitude, on rye or next to boiled potatoes. Curing was also preserving, keeping food on the table and not losing a single bite. On Fridays, the smell drifted through tenements and told you Shabbat was close. At first, one piece was split between 3 or 4 people. Later, that same cut showed up at weddings, holidays, and crowded counters. And that's where this story changes scale. Cholent. In old New York tenements, Cholent set the rhythm of Shabbat. Since tradition forbade cooking on Saturday, everything started Friday afternoon. Jewish mothers layered the pot, beans, barley, onions, potatoes, and, when they could, a few pieces of meat. The lid went on, and it headed to the neighborhood bakery, where the oven stayed lit all night. On Saturday, after synagogue, the Lower East Side seemed to breathe that smell. Families picked up their pots, still hot, and squeezed around the table to share. It wasn't fancy food. It was a lesson in waiting. For people who spent the week working brutal hours, every spoonful said that rest gets cooked slowly too, and that pot held memories the city hadn't taken away yet. Inside, it fit prayer, silence, and the taste of the old world. And when the lid came off, something in that routine started to change. Rugalech. In tenements of old New York, all it took was the oven turning on for the whole building to know Rugalech was coming. The smell slipped into the hallway and mixed hunger with hope. The recipe crossed Eastern Europe, where butter was rare and every crumb mattered. In the new city, with flour, sugar, and jams more within reach, the sweet found a new way to exist. The dough was rolled out, filled with nuts, raisins, cinnamon, or fruit preserves, and shaped into little crescents. Almost always it was late at night. After work, immigrant mothers kneaded on narrow tables while kids did homework nearby. The oven's heat also warmed the home in winter. Each little roll came out not for profit, but to keep a piece of home alive. And when the first bite melted in your mouth, it wasn't just sugar, it was memory, care, and the stubbornness to keep going. And that sweetness still has a lot to say. Babka. In the crowded tenements of the Lower East Side, babka was a luxury disguised as thrift. It came from leftover challah dough from Shabbat. The dough was rolled thin, spread with jam, sugar, or cinnamon, twisted, and baked until it filled the building with smell. When chocolate became more common in New York, bakers reinvented everything. They mixed cocoa and sugar, creating swirls that, in every slice, seemed to remember where they came from. In many kitchens, mothers made babka for holidays, weddings, or to get through a heavy week. The crust crackled as it cooled on the windowsill above the noise of Hester Street, and neighbors swapped pieces like they were swapping good news, already thinking about the next batch. It wasn't about excess. It was about celebrating in small doses, like finding a pause in the middle of a squeeze. Inside, the dough held layers of joy and the idea that everything can still rise. Brisket with onion and mushroom gravy. Before it became a must-have at Jewish celebrations, brisket was the forgotten cut at the counter, cheap, tough, and stubborn to tenderize. But in immigrant New York, it found a different fate. It started over high heat with schmaltz, just to brown it and get things going. Then came onions, garlic, and mushrooms, making a bed that held in moisture. The roasting pan went into a low oven and stayed there for hours until the whole apartment smelled like home. Nothing was rushed. The family planned, saved fat and broth, and came back to baste the meat, building a dark sauce little by little. When Friday night came, the week's work finally gave way to dinner, and the brisket showed up glossy next to potatoes or noodles. The onions melted down, the meat gave in to the fork, and every slice carried a piece of that Jewish New York. Herring with sour cream. For many Jews who arrived in New York in the early 20th century, herring wasn't just food, it was a shortcut back home. In the Old World, the poor man's fish came salted and pickled, made to last when winter hit hard. In America, they found barrels on Delancey Street, cheap if you had a few cents. To tame the salt, they soaked the fillets overnight. The next day, they mixed them with sour cream and onions, a splash of vinegar, and, if the taste called for it, a pinch of sugar. With dark bread or potatoes, it became breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on what work allowed. And while the city ran and the language changed, that flavor kept making room for memory. In tenement kitchens, the bowl passed around between bills and homesickness, and the fish said there was still belonging. Salt, cream, and tradition turned into a map to follow. Egg cream. In New York, the egg cream is a fake-out by name. It has no egg and no cream. It showed up at early 20th century soda fountains when immigrant kids packed into tenements wanted a taste of luxury that fit in their pockets. For a few cents, you got a tall glass of cold seltzer, a little milk, and a ribbon of chocolate syrup. The fun was watching the counter do its thing. Pour, stir, get the rhythm right, and the drink turns foamy. The bubbles rise, the glass shines, and the line stretches out just to keep the show going. In summer, workers and neighborhood kids crowded the corner for that first sip. Simple flavor, big effect, chocolate, fizz, and a soft layer on top. In a hard world, it reminded people joy could be made on the spot, and it still pulled folks close. And when the glass was empty, the urge to order another was already there, like the foam was holding a bigger story. Whitefish salad on rye. In the early 1900s, in New York delis, whitefish salad became the perfect move for anyone who wanted to eat well without spending much. It started in the smokehouses along the East River. Jewish immigrants salted and smoked local fish, cheaper than salmon but still packed with flavor. Then they flaked the meat, added a little mayo, lemon, and onion, and spread it on rye bread. At the corner cart, the packed counter, or the Shabbat table, It was Sunday food for people who worked all week and needed something that would stick with them. If someone showed up unannounced, there was always a piece to offer without having to stretch the meal. For a generation that knew what lack felt like, that creamy spread said, "Now we can." And with every bite, it wasn't just food, it was a sign you'd made it, making room for the next step in this story. Potato latkes with applesauce. There was a smell that could make any family slow down on the street. Latkes sizzling in a pan. Grated potatoes mixed with onions and eggs turned into pancakes, dropped into hot oil until they got a crust. In old New York tenements, that steam drifted down the hall and said, "Home." On Hanukkah, mothers spent hours at the stove, flipping each round at just the right time, while kids waited close to the flame. The recipe carried a story, the oil that lasted 8 nights, and the stubbornness of people who came from across the ocean. With applesauce or sour cream, you got the contrast between comfort and tight living. Oil was expensive, potatoes were affordable. The math worked. And when the platter finally hit the table, the first bite, crisp outside and soft inside, made space for whatever came next. Onion rolls. Before the bagel sandwich became the symbol of New York delis, the onion roll ran the show in Jewish bakeries. Simple but delicious, it was made with leftover dough, brushed with egg, and topped with fried onions that stuck to your fingers. When it came out of the oven, it gave off an irresistible smell of caramelized onion with a golden crust and a soft inside. Immigrants on their way to work grabbed the bread while it was still hot, sometimes splitting it to share or dunking it in soup. What made it special was how versatile it was. It could hold pastrami, brisket, chopped liver, or even just a simple layer of butter. In the Lower East Side bakeries, onion rolls were an open invitation to comfort, warm, affordable, and sending their smell out into the streets. Many bakers guarded their recipes like a family secret, passed down generation to generation. Even years later, the smell of that bread could still take any New Yorker back to the city's simplest days. Challah. In the tight hallways of New York tenements, there was a smell that announced Friday before the sun was even up. Challah in the oven, on its way to Shabbat. It was the center of the table, just sweet enough and made with eggs. But it was also a way of holding a whole life together. Immigrant women got up early, mixed flour, sugar, and whatever their budget allowed in worn-out bowls, and let the dough rise while the city woke up loud. Even when money was short, they set aside enough for flour and a single egg, because Shabbat without that bread felt incomplete. When it baked, the smell traveled through walls and soothed the weak. Kids pinched off pieces while it was still warm, sometimes dipped in honey, and laughter filled the room. When you tore the challah, it wasn't just food being passed around. It was care, faith, and the sense that the next batch was still to come. Blintzes filled with cheese or fruit. Before diners were advertising pancakes and crepes, Jewish immigrants in old New York already had their ritual. Rolling Blintzes, almost see-through crepes that hid soft cheese or sweet fruit. The recipe came from Eastern Europe, where nothing went to waste and every thread of milk and every handful of flour had a purpose. In the city, the tradition kept going, just with riper fruit and more generous fillings. In time-worn cast-iron pans, the rolls were browned in butter until the edges turned crisp. On Sundays and holidays, the family squeezed around the stove, waiting for the next one to come out steaming. A dusting of sugar or a spoonful of sour cream was enough to remind you that joy can be simple, made to share. And when the smell slipped into the hallway and a neighbor knocked just to say hi, you could pretty much guess why. Matzah brie. At Passover, when bread disappears from Jewish homes, matzah brie shows up as the reliable solution. Leftover matzah is broken up, given a quick dip in water or milk, and then mixed into beaten eggs. In a hot pan, the sizzle becomes the soundtrack. Improvising takes shape, with crispy edges and a soft center. On the Lower East Side, in tiny kitchens, mothers seasoned it based on whatever was in the cupboard. Honey or sugar when the week was generous, salt and onions when it wasn't. Kids waited for the crackle of the first flip. Dads waited for the plate that filled you up for cheap. Between restrictions and rules, the recipe taught one simple idea. You can make comfort out of what's left. Some families even turned it into a game, trying to flip the bigger piece without breaking it, while the soaking time became a secret passed along. Tzimmes. There was a dish that could make the whole home feel like a celebration. Tzimmes. In a slow pot, carrots, dried fruit, and honey came together, and the perfume of sugar and spices rose like an invitation. In the early 1900s, Jewish immigrants made tzimmes for holidays, weddings, and Shabbat dinner, filling tight apartments with a promise. Its roots were peasant food in Eastern Europe, where carrots symbolized gold, and with it, the wish to prosper. In New York, you used whatever your budget allowed: prunes, raisins, sweet potatoes, sometimes cinnamon. After hours, everything turned into a soft sweetness, half food, half memory, and each spoonful left a gentle note on your tongue that better days could still have a place at the table. For tenement kids, it felt like dessert and a dream in the same spoon, and the quiet bubbling on the stove became company on long nights. A pita-style variation with egg and eggplant, Sabich style. Before it took over the streets of Israel, Sabich was already taking shape in New York in the 1900s. Jews newly arrived from Iraq, Yemen, and the Levant put together a simple sandwich carried by Sephardic and Mizrahi traditions. Into a warm pita or small challah rolls went roasted eggplant, hard-boiled eggs, pickled vegetables, and a drizzle of oil. And that was enough energy to get through the day. On the Lower East Side, between tenement kitchens and punishing shifts, the recipe changed depending on what showed up. Fried eggplant layered with potatoes and egg, or just bread rubbed with garlic and olive oil. It was the working man's Shabbat breakfast, portable, eaten on the way to the factory or the synagogue. Without tahini and without luxuries, it still carried identity. It reminded you that Jewish food is many stories, braided like challah, and every bite pushed that memory forward. Fake roasts made from wheat in kosher delis. In the early 1900s, Jewish delis in New York had a very practical problem: how to offer a filling dish without breaking kosher rules and without breaking the bank. The solution came from a humble ingredient: wheat gluten. Long before anyone was talking about vegetarianism, those counters were already betting on a plant-based workaround. With gluten, broth, onions, and spices, they made a firm dough, shaped it like a roast, and let it cook for hours over low heat, braising in a dark sauce. When it hit the cutting board, it sliced like brisket and, from a distance, looked like real meat. For many immigrants, it was the Sunday they could have without compromising their faith. On Shabbat, When real meat was out of reach, the fake roast became the center of the table, with the family gathered, carving slices and passing the gravy, showing how tradition can also be held up by invention. Yeast dough sweets filled with plums. As Friday got close in Old New York, many Jewish families closed out the city's hard pace with a simple move: a sweet yeast bread filled with plums. The recipe had crossed the Atlantic from bakeries in Poland and Galicia, where ripe fruit was wrapped in dough, left to rise slowly, and baked until the seams burst into purple streaks. In tenements, mothers adjusted the recipe to what the budget allowed: prune jam, or, when luck showed up, fresh plums from the stands on Orchard Street. The smell of sugar, butter, and yeast rose through the hallways and pulled in kids from every floor. Served still warm with sugar on top, it became a small reward after work and prayers. More than dessert, that sweet bread reminded people there was still room for gratitude, sharing, and memory, even in lean weeks. When you put bagels, brisket, kugel, and pickles bubbling in barrels together, the picture gets clear. In New York, food was also a life strategy. Jewish immigrants didn't carry only ingredients. They carried a way to keep going, turning scarcity into care and routine into inheritance. In the early 1900s, kitchens were small, paychecks were short, and dreams were fragile, but the table held. A 2-cent knish on a factory break, Shabbat stew cooking while the family prayed. Every bite held a decision. These dishes fed bodies and built bonds, comfort and identity in a city that moved fast. And the echo is still there. In delis, bakeries, and markets, the smell brings back the courage of keeping flavor alive when everything was tight. And that's where the story gets even more interesting.